The truth about my dad, I don't think I've ever told anyone the full story of this. I like to keep my private life private. But I guess anonymous Reddit accounts work too. It's coming up to 2 years since he left me. Since I was disowned. It still hurts. I still cry for him, even in my big old age. I miss him, even though he was an ass. The problem with me is I only focus on the good in people. I neglect to notice the bad shit until it gets to the point of life or death situations. But I guess here it is. My confession of what my dad was really like. If you want any idea about the direction this story is going, I guess I'll start with my first memory. I'm 3 years old. I think I needed the toilet, I don't remember. What matters is he caught me out of bed. It was only 8 o'clock. I remember him slamming me against the wall, his hand around my throat. If I think about it, I can remember the smell of the beer on his breath and seeing the can in his hand. It's a can of Stella. I can feel the spit on my face as he screams at me, see that look in his eyes that I don't think I'll ever forget as he screams louder. I remember crying for my mom. Begging her for help. She never came. The first recorded instance of him hitting me was when I was 18 months old. I touched some of his stuff. Didn't even break it. I just touched it. But that was enough. He hit me so hard, his watch sliced up my back really badly. My nursery found it, and almost got CPS involved, but my mom managed to convince them it was an accident. That's always the way, isn't it? I don't remember much else from my early years. Apart from the restraining. If there's one thing my dad loved, it was power. Control. And he learned early on it's easy to feel powerful if it's a little kid you're hurting. He'd pun us down on the floor. Sit on us, lay on top of us, anything to hold us still. He'd always wanted to be in the army, but he was diabetic, so he couldn't join. So he knew ways to keep us down and screaming. He knew all the pressure points. Shoulders, ribs, ears, hips, collarbones. He knew exactly where to dig his fingers in to make your body go limp and make you scream. And he'd shout at you, his face close to yours, until you felt all dizzy and you couldn't breathe because you were so scared. He hit sometimes too. Hitting, shouting. Slap on the ass if you pissed him off, which isn't exactly abuse, but doesn't mean it didn't bloody hurt. Once he grabbed my wrist so hard I had bruises all over my arm from his fingers. It hurt. He'd call you names too. And he was always drunk. Always. I don't even know how he managed to cause so much damage when he was absent most of the time. I grew up mostly without him. He stayed at work until late. He owned his own business, so he'd stay there until midnight, drinking and doing whatever he pleased to his heart's content. During the summer, and after school, we had to go to work too. We weren't allowed to do much. Sit up straight, be quiet and be good. If you didn't, you'd have to face his wrath. And nobody liked that very much. We were very poor, so I guess it was necessary. He got worse as I got older. Drank more. So my parents divorced. And I was faced with a choice. My whole family was abusive, so it wasn't very easy to choose. Did I live with my mom, get slapped, get yelled at, and have to deal with my sister? My sister would threaten to kill me in my sleep, beat me up, call me names, tell me to kill myself constantly, etc., or go with my dad, the man who was always drunk and not there? I made my decision one night in July. They'd just broken up, and I remember going downstairs. He was writing, and I asked him what he was doing. He told me he was writing his suicide note. That he was going to kill himself. That he had nothing left to live for. I was only 11. I don't know how long I cried and begged him not to until finally my mom came downstairs and made him tell me he wouldn't. He locked the letter in a cupboard, and wouldn't let anyone see it. He ended up burning them. And just like that, he was gone. The abuse from my mom and sister only got worse. Until, for better or worse, my mom kicked me out. She despised my dad. And even though I knew what he did, I still loved him. You've got to remember I was a kid. The abuse was all I knew. I thought that was what love was supposed to feel like. I guess that's just my way of justifying the single worst decision I ever made. It started off okay. He bought me shoes, clothes, things I needed, but lacked. And because he'd never given me anything before, because I'd never been treated like a person before, and I was finally getting what I thought I wanted, I was finally loved, I stayed. It didn't take long for it to get worse. There was a bit of shouting and hitting. And I tried to leave. So he changed his tactics. He'd tell me we were being watched. The government was after us, and the only way we'd be safe is if we stuck together. My mom had set hitmen on us. We were in danger. I actually developed psychosis because of everything he told me. He made this plan, a safety plan. We'd break into my mom's house, kidnap my younger siblings and save them from her, move to America and live off the grid. He said it was the only way we would be safe. He said a lot of things. At night he'd go into the garage. Sometimes I'd go with him. He'd smoke, and we'd talk. I felt like things were going to be okay. I was being good, so he was being good too. Until I found out he was smoking cannabis. I got upset. He got mad at me, and I wanted to leave. Went to my mom's house for a weekend. My younger siblings cried and begged for me to stay. The thing I regret most is leaving them. Making them hurt so bad. They were only babies. 2, 3 years old. When I came back, I went into the garage with him. And that's where it all went downhill. He looked me in the eyes. Smiled. And said, "I want to kill myself. If it wasn't for you, the kids, I would." And then he started crying. I didn't know what to do. I was 12 by this point. I tried to comfort him, but he just got worse, going on and on about how he was a terrible person, and how if I ever left him he'd kill himself. He started burning himself with his cigarettes and made me watch. He said, "If you ever leave, I think I'll kill myself." And at that moment, everything felt unreal. Like I was watching a movie. I cried and begged him not to. Pulled in his arms, tried to take his cigarette away as he burned himself over and over and over again. I screamed for him to stop, even though it wasn't me he was hurting this time. I told him if he didn't stop I'd hurt myself too. I regret that. He was hurting, so he hurt himself. When it was over I rubbed antiseptic into his burns. I confiscated his lighters, so next time he used his fishing knives. So I took those away too. He'd come to my bedroom drunk, pleading for them back so he could smoke again. From that moment on, I always had to go with him and supervise him. If I didn't, he'd find a way to hurt himself. And then he'd come to find me, and show me. He'd tell me to make it all better. And I tried. I really did try. It was around this time he got me drinking too. I ended up with an addiction to both whiskey and vodka. I couldn't go a day without an Irish coffee, if you know what I mean. I was 12. One of my younger brothers lived with us. I stopped letting him around my dad unsupervised. I tried to protect him. It didn't work, as my dad managed to get my brother hooked on porn and cigarettes. He was 10. I made my dad wear long-sleeved shirts in front of my brother, so he started self-harming his hands. He wanted us to see. Luckily my brother didn't understand. He didn't realize it was self-inflicted. It was around that time the talk started too. He'd describe in great detail how he'd kill himself and why, and beg me to make him feel better. I'd try my best, but I never knew what to say. Then came his fantasies of murder and torture. He'd describe in great detail how he wanted to kill someone and put fish hooks through their skin and slowly rip them out. Peel their skin off and cover them in salt, amongst other things. The person in these fantasies was usually my mother. It wasn't long until my OCD got worse. All I could see were these images of everything he said in my head. It was terrifying. I couldn't even sleep. And then, believe it or not, it got worse again. As I mentioned before, he's diabetic. He stopped taking his medication and got drunk and high instead. I don't know how many times I called the ambulances for him. I stopped sleeping at night. It wasn't safe. I stayed up, checking his blood sugar every hour while he slept, and panicked when it was high or low. One night he almost died. It was winter, during the COVID pandemic. He'd promised to get me a shirt I really wanted. Some dumb YouTuber thing. I only owned one shirt and one pair of joggers, the ones he got me when I first came to live with him. And I was so excited. I made him a PayPal, set it all up, and he passed out, drunk and high on my bedroom floor. I sighed and tucked him up with my blanket, before going to search for food. He rarely bought food, because his habits proved expensive, so I wouldn't eat so my brother could. When I came back he wasn't breathing properly. By the time the ambulance arrived, they had to inject him and attach this machine to him. The ambulance lady told me that he would have died if I didn't call when I did. I stopped sleeping entirely after that. I only slept when I knew he was sober. He only got worse. I had to carry him to the shop on my shoulder so we could eat. I'd beg him to stop, to get sober. He promised he would. He promised a lot of things. My shoes broke. They'd had holes in them for ages, and eventually, the soles just fell off. His habit was more important than food, so it was definitely more important than my shoes. I had to steal a pair of slippers from his old workshop when he went there to raid it. They didn't fit, and they were inside, old people, bedtime slippers. But it was that or walking to the shops barefoot like I'd been doing for the past few weeks. It was around this time he became incredibly sexual. He was spiraling. He'd describe his sexual fantasies in great detail to me, his 13-year-old daughter. He'd point at women on the street, talk about their bodies, and what he wanted to do to them. One time we were walking behind this woman. He was high, as usual. And he was pointing at her ass, telling me about how he wanted to fuck her so bad, and he wouldn't stop going on and on about her body. I didn't know if she could hear. But I slapped him. Right in the face. He was shocked, to say the least. The only time I'd hit him is when he would fight us. He wanted to be a boxer, so he'd make us put gloves on and fight him. The only way to get him to stop was to give him a nosebleed because it made him sleepy. I looked him in the eyes and told him to stop. He got all grumpy with me. Then came his side chick. He never funked her, but he wanted to. He just couldn't get it up. One night he took me and my brother to her house. It was late. He'd taken 4 Viagra's and he was telling me all about it. He was telling me about how he was gonna fuck her until she couldn't walk in extreme detail. As soon as we got to her house he passed out on the couch. He took me to drug dealers' houses too. We didn't even know who they were. Just me and my dad at a drug dealer's house at 3 in the morning. The drug dealer seemed scary. He yelled at my dad for bringing his kid with him. Yelled, even more, when Dad tried to smoke around me. Told him to keep his habits to himself and away from his kids. And when my dad passed out, I just sat there in silence, hugging my knees to my chest while the drug dealer talked with his girlfriend. It could have gone so bad. But luckily, they were good people. They took pity on me and he let me play GTA on his Xbox. I was only 13. And I was so scared. They managed to wake him up by 6 a.m. Drove us home. Both the dealer and his girlfriend yelled at my dad the entire way back home. Called him irresponsible for leaving his daughter with strangers. And they kept on telling me how strong and brave I was. I didn't feel strong. And I certainly didn't feel brave. He did other stuff too. Like he'd refuse to take me to the doctor. In my country we have free healthcare. He tried to get me to take weed too. I was in a lot of pain. I didn't realize it was because of how severely malnourished I was. I could barely move most days, and the pain was intense. He made me a joint. Told me it would make me feel better. It didn't. It made my throat hurt and I coughed until I threw up. It hurt. He did lots more as well, but I'm only just realizing how long this post is. Sorry about that. It's okay if you don't read all of this. It is a bit long. I guess I just wanted to tell someone about it. Even if that someone is the internet. If you've read this far, congratulations. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening. Sorry for all of. Well, this. I don't even know if this counts as a confession. I'll delete it if it doesn't. Well, goodbye.